All right. Hi, everybody. Um, Thank you for joining New York City Bird Alliance for our winter lecture series. My name is Jesse McLaughlin. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm the Senior Advocacy Associate at NYC Bird Alliance. We're also joined here in the little NYC Bird Alliance logo square by Tasha Naula, our Public Programs Manager. Hi, Tasha. This is our final installment of our winter lecture series this year, which ran from November to March. This year, our series is entitled Spread Your Wings. A special thank to Claude and Lucien Bloch for their ongoing support for this series. Before we start, we just have a few quick housekeeping notes. So please just note that this lecture is being recorded, and the recording will be posted later this week on our website for anyone to view. Except for myself and the speakers here, your cameras and mics are off, so you don't need to worry about being a part of the recording. We have enabled closed captioning for this Zoom and in the recording. You can type your questions directly into the Zoom's Q&A feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. I will be asking questions aloud to the speaker. And throughout the talk, feel free to use the Zoom chat function for general comments. We'll also be posting links to the chat throughout the lecture. So for those of you who are new to NYC Bird Alliance, let me tell you a bit more about our organization and how you can get involved. New York City Bird Alliance is a conservation nonprofit that protects wild birds and their habitat across New York City. We work to make New York City a more bird-friendly place through conservation science, advocacy, and engagement. We have science research projects, including bird surveys and monitoring efforts across the city. Community science volunteers are vital to that work, and you can join in to help us collect data on bird populations and conservation threats here in New York City. And there's a link now in the chat about how to volunteer with us. The data we collect then informs our advocacy efforts to protect birds. We're currently focusing on making the city's buildings safer to reduce bird populations to reduce bird collisions with buildings. And we need your help with this effort. So follow the link in the chat also for opportunities to advocate for birds. New Yorkers' connections with birds often start with our engagement efforts. So throughout the year, we offer hundreds of bird outings, classes, workshops, and festivals to foster an appreciation for birds and nature in the city while inspiring action. And so in our work, we recognize that much of our programming takes place in and often are in partnership with New York City's public green spaces. These spaces are part of Lenapehoking, the unceded homelands of the Lenape people. Lenapehoking includes New York City, New Jersey, parts of New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. So we acknowledge the Lenape as the original inhabitants and stewards of this place and honor their continuing relationship with Lenapehoking and express our gratitude for the past, present, and future roles as caretakers of these lands. And there will also be a link to a calendar for bird outings and classes in the chat as well. So now on to tonight's event. During our lecture series this winter, we've had the pleasure of hosting birders and authors and conservation scientists who have discussed the wonders of birds both around the world and throughout time. And tonight, our final lecture, we hear from Gillian Staveley and Tanya from Dena Kayeh Institute in Northern Canada as they share their insights on preserving North America's boreal forests, a crucial habitat for wildlife, including migratory birds. Gillian Staveley is the Director of Culture and Land Stewardship for Dena Kayeh Institute. Tanya is the Land Guardian Coordinator for the Dena Land Guardian Network. The Dena Kayeh Institute is a nonprofit society that was established in 2004 and created to empower, preserve, and protect the Kaska Dena language, oral traditions, history, culture, and traditional knowledge. The Dena Kayeh Institute works in partnership with the Boreal Conservation Program at the National Audubon Society. So now, without further ado, I will be handing this off to Gillian to start the presentation.
Great. Sukasinla, Jesse. Well, Dinta, good evening, everyone. It's a little earlier in the evening for some of us, I guess, on the West Coast compared to those of you on the East Coast, but we're more than happy and thrilled to be with you here tonight, Tanya and I. We wanted to start off by just situating ourselves a little bit more on who we are and where we're calling in from. And to share a little bit more about the work that we do. So as Jesse mentioned, we're going to be talking predominantly about the Dena Kayeh Land Guardian Network and the work that we do with groups like Audubon on understanding our landscape more and understanding the birds that come through our lands as well. So as Jesse mentioned, we're both part of DKI, which is a non-for-profit charitable organization that's involved in the ongoing recruitment and retention of our land guardians, but we're also in charge of the advocacy around a Casca Indigenous protected area proposal that we have within our traditional territory. So we'll be speaking a little bit about that with you tonight as it relates to birds. So this is just a bit of a map that shows who we are and where we're calling in from. So Tanya and I are both part of the Casca Dena Nation, and our nation is in Northeast British Columbia, parts of the Southeast Yukon, and the Northwest Territories. So 240,000 square kilometers is where our ancestral territory is. It's the areas that we call home. Within this area, we have 5 contemporary Casca Dena communities. And where Tanya and I work out of is in northern BC, so in this part of the traditional territory. And in terms of, this landscape, in terms of this landscape in the areas it inhabits, as Jesse mentioned, we are predominantly within the boreal forest, but we also have subalpine environments as well. And these habitats that are within our traditional territory are the lands that our ancestors have lived on for thousands of years. And in that time, we've learned a lot about those lands and waters and the different wildlife and bird species that have come through that area and also call it their home. And because we live in the boreal forest, a lot of the wetlands and areas that are within our traditional territory are those perfect spots for North America's migratory birds and where they breed and where they also call their home. So a lot of the boreal wetlands within our traditional territory really make up a huge percentage of our landscape, and we therefore understand it as being a very critical ecosystem, and it's a part and parcel for us to protect that area. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how we're planning on protecting that area. But before we get into that, Tanya has some great information she wants to share about how our Land Guardian program is advancing our understanding of the wetlands and different areas within our traditional territory to understand how we can better support our bird species that are in that area. We, like so many other nations in Canada and the United States, are dealing with the expansion of industrial development as well as the realistic nature of climate change. So we know we have to have an increased need of knowing these wildlife and bird populations so that we can know how to support them. So I'm going to hand it off to Tanya. She's going to be talking more about how we're advancing that knowledge of our lands and waters and how birds are using these places. So Tanya, you can just let me know when you want me to change the slides.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanya Ball. My traditional name is Dakadla. I'm from the Tahltan and Casca Nations. I live in Lower Post, BC. I've started work with the Guardian program in 2014 and have been with them ever since. So our program has really expanded. The Guardian program started in 2015, a year after I started with Dena Kayeh Institute, and then we created the Dena Kayeh Land Guardian Network. These are some of the following studies that we work on top of the bird work that we're completing right now. So we do wildlife observations. Those are done throughout all of the seasons. We do traditional knowledge teaching from our elders, which can include wildlife medicines, cultural teachings. We've held 2 moose hide tanning camps in the fall, which have been really successful with our schools and our community members. We document environmental concerns within the traditional territory. Every hunting season from August to the end of October, we're conducting hunter-harvest surveys, observations, and patrols within our traditional territory. We've started our own placer water sampling program around concerns about the water that lead from our into our main river systems. So we have data on barrel loggers, we collect flow measurements, YSI readings. We've also just started lake monitoring in August of 2024, so we're looking to expand that. that program, looking at monitoring lakes. So that includes the birds, wetlands, and the lake health itself. We have 10 lakes within our traditional territory in both BC and Yukon that we're working on. We've done invasive plant training and yearly surveys for the last 3 years. We've installed our own climate station where we noticed there was gaps in the data within the province of BC. So we collect the data from there quarterly. We have temperature loggers in and around the Liard Hot Springs. We collect that data quarterly as well. We conduct sheep, moose, and caribou surveys, and then our bird migration monitoring, which we started in 2022. The ARU's autonomous recording units. The ARUs allow for ongoing remote collection of audio data from the surrounding landscape, including bird songs and calls. The ARUs record audio of the surrounding landscape at pre-programmed times and store the recordings until they can be retrieved at a later date. So we install the ARUs early in the spring, usually April or May, and then we'll go back and collect them at the end of October. That data can be later analyzed to determine the presence of birds in the area and serve as an archive of the overall bioacoustics landscape that can be repeated and compared over time to help understand changes taking place within the ecological communities. Environment Climate Change Canada. We started work with them in 2022. So across British Columbia, Indigenous community members play a key role in monitoring and managing wildlife. The Environment and Climate Change Canada is partnering with several Indigenous communities in the Boreal region to collaboratively monitor land birds and other species of interest within their territories. This data helps to inform Canada-wide boreal bird population estimates, supports community-specific monitoring goals, knowledge sharing, and decision-making. So we partnered with them in 2022 with the Land Guardian program. They trained us on how our ARUs worked and where to set them up and what kind of locations to look for. So we had the biologists come out and do the training, and then the Guardians were able to take over after that. Next slide, please. So this was the data we collected from the ECC ARUs. So this is the number of species identified at each site. We had, which is very close to our community, Sucker Lake. So there was 39 species identified. McKenna Lake was another location we did, which is in the Yukon, 17 species. And then Barney Lake, just on the border, the BC-Yukon border, we are still processing that data. Wheeler Lake is on Highway 37 in the BC territory. It's 39 species, which is by our other northern community, Casca community of Good Hope Lake. Crooked Lake is a very high traditional use area for our people, so that's very important. So we do a lot of different studies around this area. There was 27 species identified. And in the Muncho Lake Park, we had a couple different ARUs kind of on the same location where Moose Lake is. So we had 31 species on the one location and 40 species on the other. And those were both located around wetland areas. Next slide, please. 2022-23 results from those recorders. So we had everything from chickadees, finches, sparrows, woodpeckers, owls, different waterfowl, grouse and ptarmigans, just so many different things that we're learning about. So it's so awesome to see all this data come together because it's just giving us so much more information and training on the different wildlife and studies that we can be doing within our traditional territory through our Guardian program. The species of interest were the common loon and the lesser yellowlegs. And some of the species or sounds were not detected by the ARUs where they were unable to identify them. Next slide. Another partnership we've started with is with Ducks Unlimited Canada. So we've started wetland classification work in 2019 in regards to our Indigenous protected and conserved area. Then we continue to do wetland classification training with our guardians and our youth hires that we bring on in the summer. And then the ARU site identification in and around wetland areas. And then we had employee from Ducks Unlimited join us last year to assist with the site identification for the deployment of the ARUs in the spring. And those were all heli access areas that we did last year. Yeah, next slide. In 2023 is when we started our work with Audubon. The Dena Kayeh Institute conducted bird surveys with the ARUs in collaboration with the National Audubon Society's Boreal Conservation Program. Surveys were conducted in the proposed Casca Indigenous Protected and Conserved Area. This region is ancestral territory of the Cascadena, and the proposed area for the protection encompasses approximately 40,000 square kilometers within the Mackenzie River Basin.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to speak to a little bit more about the IPCA, because this might be something that folks on the Zoom tonight haven't heard of before. So I wanted to spend a bit of time just describing it and how it relates to the work that we're doing with Audubon and Ducks Unlimited and other partners around understanding bird species within this area more. From the map that I showed you earlier of the Cascadena traditional territory, there's very specific parts within our territory that we want to safeguard and protect. And a tool that's being used in Canada is something called an IPCA. So it's where the vision of an Indigenous nation is brought forward so that we, oh, I think my Alexa was recording me and telling me what an IPCA was, so that was funny. Anyways, but IPCAs are a way that in Canada we are advancing the future of conservation, because Indigenous nations, in collaboration with their partners, are putting that vision forward, and they are part of the primary role in seeing landscapes protected. So we're not seeing national parks or protected areas or conservancies established in Canada anymore without Indigenous nations leading what that looks like. We're encompassing our laws, our traditional laws, into how areas are stewarded and managed and governed. And that's really what makes it unique and different. Another really important part of IPCAs is that they represent this long-term commitment to conservation, and they really elevate Indigenous rights and responsibilities in the process. So this map in the middle, you see just the red dots represent IPCA proposals that we have currently in Canada. And actually there's many more than that map, what that map portrays, but it gives you a sense of just how many nations are leading this work, and the Cascadena are also doing this work with our communities. So the IPCA, the 40,000 square kilometers of landscape that Tanya mentioned that we were doing that ARU work in, is this area outlined in red. So we have an IPCA that's proposed in northern BC that is called Dena Kayeh, and in our language that means the people's way we follow. It's a really important principle or ethic, I guess you could say, of how we want to live our lives and how we want to safeguard these lands for future generations. And just within this area alone, we were located in the Rocky Mountain Trench. So this is a flight path for so many migratory bird species. There's over 300 bird species that migrate through our territory each year. And that's why it's so important for us to protecting the wetlands that they rely upon to get them to the northern places that they need to go. This area in particular, we see in just a few weeks, we'll be starting to see our swans coming back up north, and they're followed not that far behind by the sandhill cranes. And it's just such a beautiful, magical time of year. And it's so great to be able to have ARUs documenting the types of bird species that are utilizing these areas. And it's something that I know we really take pride in, to say that our nation and our communities know so much about these birds and these lands because we've lived amongst them for thousands of years. This is just another map that shows you a little bit more where this landscape is. It is within the Boreal region, and this is an area that Tanya and I, we've lived our whole lives in the Boreal region, and we take great pride in knowing that, 25% of wetlands in the world exist within this region, and hence why these intact wildernesses are so important for us to protect, because they're protecting the world's wetlands. And when we're able to protect them, we are offsetting the effects that we see of climate change and biodiversity loss. And so they have it's globally significant what we're doing, and we really take great pride in what we're doing, and being able to just say that we're doing our part to make sure that these areas are protected for the bird species that rely upon them. This is just another close-up of the area with some of our traditional place names. As Tanya mentioned, we you know, some of these areas are where the ARUs are located, and they're areas that our people still use to this day. We have over 18,000 cultural heritage sites within these areas. So it's areas that we still call home to this day, and areas that we're wanting to understand more so that we know how to protect this landscape. And that's a big role in what Tanya and the Land Guardians do on a daily basis. So I'm going to hand it back to her because there's a few more slides that she's going to go through that describe some of that work. Oh, this is just, sorry, forgot about these landscape shots, just to paint a bit of a picture of the lands that we call home. These are all areas within our IPCA proposal.
So back to the Audubon work that we did. This was the data that came out of the 2023 ARUs that were deployed. So these were 3 of the sites that we put in, 3 of the ARUs. That was our first year with Audubon. So it just shows a general map area. Lower Post is our community. So we had one located on Highway 37 by a lake wetland area. And then we had 2 others down towards our Liard Hot Springs that we deployed for that year of 2023. And then just gives an overview of kind of where those sites are in their GPS coordinates. Next slide. The results were a total of 51 bird species were detected across the 3 survey sites, including 30 land bird species, 5 raptor and owl species, 5 shorebird species, and 11 waterfowl and waterbird species. 2 species detected are listed by the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada, including the common nighthawk and the lesser yellowlegs. Next slide. And this is the sites that we deployed ARUs in April of 2024. So those were collected in October 2024, and that data has not been submitted yet. So we haven't seen the results from it, but all of the points in red are where we could get by road access, and all the points in blue are within the IPCA and we're all heli access. And this is just a map of all of the ARUs that we deployed since 2022 to 2024. So we have the 3rd year, the 2nd year, and the 1st year of all the ARUs within the traditional Casca territory. And that would have been the work with Environment Climate Change Canada as well as Audubon. And then I'll hand it back over to Gillian.
Okay, yeah. One thing we wanted to highlight is some of the work that we're doing with our partners is in sharing and telling our stories. And a great way that we can do that is having, you know, opportunities like what we're doing tonight to share a little bit more about our ancestral territory and the work that we're doing to protect it. But one thing that we're doing is using a tool called ArcGIS Story Maps to be able to share with people about, you know, what is the significance of these lands, and, you know, how we want other people to understand these lands. And the great way that we can do that is through sharing our traditional knowledge and demonstrating that long history of occupation, but also in understanding certain bird species. So I wanted to take a little bit of time tonight to share a few stories with you, and picked out these 2 birds. There's so many different birds that the Casca people have always admired and respected through our traditions and our culture. You know, in addition to the golden eagle and the chickadee, things like swans, owls. There's so many different stories out there that describes how we saw different birds. I'm thinking of the swans a lot right now because I know they're going to be coming back up here any day now. So it's just on the top of my mind. But in our traditions, in our culture, and in our language, we have different ways of describing that relationship. And for example, the swans have always been one of those birds that has always been quite highly revered in amongst our people. We always saw them as having a very powerful spirit, and you know, we have a lot of stories that describe how we saw swans. So in that respect, I wanted to be able to share with you a little bit more about the boreal chickadee and the golden eagle as well, and as examples of the ways that we want to be able to share those stories. So many of you probably are aware of the boreal chickadee, and its amazingness. That mountain chickadee that we have in our traditional territory is a pretty incredible bird. They have a lot of respect because of just how undeterred they are by the cold. They're here all the time, right? And they face many challenges within their life cycle, and they have a number of adaptations as a bird species to be able to survive in these northern climates. And so we've always respected them as a very energetic songbird with really quite remarkable brains. They're a very smart bird species. And I know I love hearing them throughout the winter, especially when it feels like the land can be so quiet, when you can hear the chickadee, it just feels like you're not as alone. But, it is a perfect choice, I guess, to describe the type of character that different birds have within our traditional stories, and the chickadee is one of those. So there is a story that we have within our communities of why we call it the firebird. So I just wanted to read quickly a little bit about that Casca story with you all. And it's obviously better shared in the language, but I'm still a language learner, so I don't know how to necessarily communicate it in our language. But in this story, there's three principal characters. There's the chickadee, and there's the fox, and the grizzly bear. And in this story, it goes to describe how the grizzly bear as an animal species is the one that actually controls fire. They have the flint rock that allows us to create fire. And he's not a very social guy, this grizzly bear. He's frequently angry, and he doesn't want to share it with the Casca. So one day, this sneaky little chickadee goes up and sneaks in and grabs that flint rock away from grizzly bear. He knows that he can't necessarily take it very far to the people, to the Cascadena people, so he actually gives it to the fox. The fox then scrambles up the mountainside, and it throws the flint rock over the cliff, where it breaks into many, many pieces, and it goes to the different communities in the north where it can be shared, so that people who have long sought to have fire can now have fire. So it's just an example of the way that we see and revere our bird species as bringing us life, is bringing us the elements of that make us who we are. And another great example of that is how we view the eagle. So eagle in our language is ahta, and like in so many cultures, the eagle is really a sacred bird to us. They're the largest of the avian predators in our area, and they are revered as such. Both of my parents were caribou biologists, and they've seen in their lifetime eagles carry off caribou calves, just after they're born. They're very strong animal species, and they were seen that way. They're also seen by the Casca people as being messengers. They were seen to believed to bring prophecies to our people and transport messages to people who have since passed away as well. So when you see an eagle, it means a lot to our communities, especially after someone's passed away. If we see an eagle, we see that as a good sign, because that eagle is bringing that person's spirit to their next journey in their afterlife. But they're part of our many stories as well. And there's actually a really cool story that really emphasizes, I think, the different ways Casca saw different birds and the guidance that they offered us, and the sharing and the respect they have of our land. So there's this one story of this Dena man, and he is out on some cliffs sheep hunting, and he's a chap attached by a rope, and he is with his wife along this area. There's a nest ledge on this cliff where there's this golden eagle, and he's trying to obtain some feathers from this eagle's nest that he can use as fletchlings for his arrows, because we did use those often for different tools as part of how we would live our lives. And this person wanted to be able to get those eagle feathers, but he didn't want to do it in such a way to disrupt the eagle, or make sure that him and his wife were not going to be harmed. But he realized he had to get his wife dropped down off of this cliff in order for him to have enough rope to go and get those eagle feathers. So he dropped his wife down, but then he was really worried about where his wife ended up. This golden eagle is flying around seeing all of this, and he lands on his nest and is asking this man what he's up to. this man's really worried about his wife now, and he says, Eagle, can you go find my wife and make sure that she's okay? I'm sorry I'm taking your feathers and disturbing your nest, but I really want to make sure she's okay. So this eagle then goes and finds his wife and signals her location to this man flying over the cliff and explaining to him where she is so that he can then drop down off the cliff and find his wife. So it's just another story, I guess, an example of just how we interacted with the different bird species within our traditional territory, and they hold very special distinction for us. These are just some other bird species that we regard and have lots of stories around. The common loon, the raven, the trumpeter swan, and the nighthawk are just some of those examples. But really, the list goes on in this story map that we're developing that we hope to have published soon. Tells you those stories, and you can listen to them and hear a little bit more about what Casca elders say about these different bird species. So I believe that brings us to a point where we were hoping to chat further with the folks that are on this Zoom tonight and answer any questions that you have. But maybe before we quickly dive into that, there is a quick video that we wanted to show you, and I just wanted to quickly play that because it really speaks to all the work that Tanya was talking about around the ARU deployment.
My name's Tanya Ball. I work with the Dena Kayeh Land Guardian Network out of Lower Post, BC. We have been working with Audubon for the last 2 years, monitoring the millions of birds that pass through our area. Today, we'll be going up by heli to install these ARUs. The recorders automatically will kick in and do recordings of the bird sounds each day in the morning and night. We download all of the data from the SD cards to keep in-house. We also send them off to Audubon to identify all of the birds for us and then bring all of that information back to our communities. One of the birds that come through the area is the lesser yellowlegs. Some of them will nest here, the rest will go on to the Arctic. It's just unbelievable when you think about how far they move. This will be our 3rd year of collecting data with the ARUs that we deploy. Working with Audubon has been great. It's brought a lot of different information into our Guardian program. Going through that very closely and understanding each bird that is passing through here and nesting, I think is really important. And then we can pick up if there's threatened species on that list as well. We're working towards having areas protected here. It's a very pristine area, so we want to keep it that way. Understanding how it affects birds from all over the world is just absolutely amazing. Everything's connected.
That's amazing. Thank you both so much. The work that you've shared in this presentation is really exciting. You know, even from all the way over here on the East Coast of North America, it gives me a lot of hope for the future of conservation, not just on Casca lands, but, you know, all over the world who can, you know, take what you're doing and be inspired by it and take action from it. I'm sure that our audience has questions. But so yeah, so if you do have a question as an audience member, you can put them in the Q&A feature here on Zoom. But in the meantime, I will ask a question or two of my own. You know, when I was first hearing about your work, I was also thinking about how Indigenous-led conservation is becoming more and more recognized by settler institutions and governments as the most effective way to safeguard habitat and reverse wildlife loss. And in Long Island, which is part of New York State, the Shinnecock kelp farmers are a multi-generation group of Indigenous women who are members of the Shinnecock Nation here on Long Island, using traditional relationship with the sea and seaweed to capture carbon and nitrogen and clean the waters in Shinnecock Bay. So this is just to help kind of for our audience members in New York City to kind of spatialize here. But just in settler-led conservation efforts, conservation and culture are not usually thought of as being complementary or in the same conversation even. And so I'm wondering to hear more from both of you about how you understand that relationship between culture and conservation.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jesse. And I mean, even amongst Canada and the United States, we share a lot of that similar history of the different tactics that have been used in the past around conservation and the colonial narrative that they really portray. Um, Even in the Yukon and northern BC where Tanya and I live, there are lots of different national parks and protected areas that were established by crown governments with not really the Indigenous nations in mind when they were creating those areas. They actually wanted to push people out of the spaces to keep them natural and to keep them true wildernesses. But really, when you take people out of the land, you're taking a really important element of what makes that land so important to begin with. And a lot of the work that Tanya does and the land guardians do is to really help us reframe how we look at the land. And the land is healthy if we are healthy. And so if we're constantly working together to make these places better for our people, but also for the land itself, we're doing a better job of really making sure that that land is stewarded according to our values and our traditions, because we've been here for a very long time. I'm an archaeologist by training, so I'm always interested in how long people have been in place, and our communities, we have a very vast a very vast time period of living in these areas since the Ice Age. And we really take great pride in knowing that our people have been here for so long and developing those strong relations with that place that we call home. And I think what makes Indigenous-led conservation so beautiful is that each of these places that we're trying to protect are so different, but they're so meaningful to our communities. And we really can bring the public along and showing them how it can be also important to them. Whether or not you live in New York or live up in the Arctic, there's these areas that we all need to have safeguarded for our own well-being. And if you're a birder and you enjoy a lot of these bird species that we've talked about that migrate through our area, I know you'll believe in these types of land protection initiatives. We got to go to Washington last year to meet with a Wetland America Trust to talk about why it's so important for that transboundary approach when we're talking about birds, and how we all have a job to do to ensure that the lands that they're on in the US are just as important as the lands that they're on in Canada, and working together in that approach to make sure that those species don't disappear within our lifetime is so important. But I'll let Tanya chime in and see if she has anything else to offer in regards to that question.
No, I think you covered it, Gillian. But just having, being able to work alongside our elders and learn on how they preserve lands and relationships with the land and the wildlife is really important. I think through the Guardian programs, we're able to teach that and learn that as well. And we're just learning so much with the partnerships we created with Audubon and, the Environment Climate Change Canada. So it just brings in more knowledge and training to our people as well. So really appreciative of that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also really appreciate the way that you're also framing your work within the hemisphere too, that we can't just be thinking about only the birds that we see at a certain period of time, but also the lands that they are also using across their whole range. Connects a lot to, we had a shorebird biologist come on to our lecture series recently who's working in Central America and trying to figure out ways to connect across that migratory path. We got a question from our audience about who all is part of your team. I can't imagine that it is possible for two people to take on this massive project of protecting this land. So who do you rely on? Who is able to support you in this work? And yeah, I'm curious about what is the group that you are working with?
Yeah, and I mean, Tanya can speak to the land guardian capacity, but our all of this work is guided by our elders. It was them that brought us together to say this is the vision that we have for this land. We want to see it happen. So we work with our Indigenous leadership in our communities. We work with our community members. And then we have this team as part of DKI that's advancing the advocacy around this proposal. But there's less people involved in this as you think. We do a lot of work with our partners as well to help, educate others, explain to others what we're doing, because this is such a new way of thinking about conservation. There is a really important educational element to it. And so we do rely upon our partners like Audubon, Ducks Unlimited, etc., to help share that story about what we're doing in regards to the spaces that they operate. And so we do have a big network. We also just, as Dene, that's a word that we use to describe people, and in the north, especially within the areas where the Athabascan language is spoken, we as Indigenous people in those regions really rely a lot upon each other as well to help each other advance the work we're doing around land stewardship. So it's a big team and a small team at the same time. We ideally are trying to work with Crown governments to see this happen. So we want to see this area legislated as an Indigenous protected area where we can then say for future generations, this land will not be utilized for industrial development, and it will be kept in this pristine form that it's in, and it will be safeguarded and stewarded by the Kaska people. So yeah, there's a lot of ways that people can be part of the work that we're doing. I think we're going to be sharing in the chat a way for you to share your support. We have a website, www.denakayeh.com, where we have a statement of support for people to sign if they believe in what we're trying to do. And you can also find out a lot of other great things there, including a documentary that I wanted to flag. That was the last slide we had in our presentation. We have a 25-minute documentary that showcases this area more. So if you have time, definitely encourage you to watch it. But yeah, Tanya, what do you think? There's less of us than people probably realize doing this work, hey?
Yes, right now we have myself plus 2 other guardians that are doing the work, and then we hire youth, mostly with high school age, so go in from grades 8 to 12 for the summer when they're off from school. So yes, just 3 of us guardians and our youth hires during the summer.
Mhm.
Wow. I mean, I can relate to being a part of a small team. Like, although the Bird Alliance is a part of the National Audubon network, we're also a very, very small team, and sometimes that can be really powerful. And so I always say never discount, a small but mighty effort. I also, in the advocacy that I do as part of the Bird Alliance, we often have to work with government officials, whether they're elected as legislators or in agencies. Like for us, the Department of Environmental Conservation and things like that, to make change at the city and the state level for us. So I'm curious what your experience has been like, doing this work, working with the government to try to get recognition and support for the work that you're doing, and what that experience has been like. What kind of skills you might have to draw on to communicate the need for the work that you do to protect habitat.
No, for sure. And because this is a new way of looking at land, it does require us to really trust one another to say, hey, we need to be looking outside the box, and we need to be asking you to look at the land as if your cultural and material lives depend on it. And when you do that, you do look at the land differently. Your worldview changes. So we are, in a lot of ways, asking people to shift their understanding of lands and waters. And in doing that, it can lead to some pretty incredible things. There are varying IPCAs across Canada already. What we're proposing isn't the first. I'll say it's probably one of the biggest in terms of areas that we're trying to protect in Canada. And in addition to the Seal River watershed, which is also trying to protect 50,000 square kilometers of land in northern Manitoba. Our proposal in northern BC is 40,000 square kilometers of lands and waters, but it's significant. That's 4% of the whole province of British Columbia. And, when people see that, they're like, wow, that's an incredible thing. But it also means that, we have to be really figuring out what the balance is. We don't disregard that we do need, resource development to occur. We have to live in this modern society, but there's some places where that just doesn't make sense. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that areas like Dena Kayeh that are completely intact, like there's no roads in here where we're talking about, there's no power lines, there's no mines, there's no forestry. It truly is as pristine as it was thousands of years ago. And in order for us to keep it that way, yeah, we have to work hard with government to make it happen. And just looking at some of the other questions people were saying about how connected we are, absolutely. Those fires are a perfect example about how connected we are. And if we are able to keep these lands as resilient as they are now, hopefully they will be that area that can sequester carbon, and those places that are going to be, we want to keep them safe so that those areas in the boreal forest aren't burning every single year. Yeah. Tanya, do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, just another note too, we work under a collaborative stewardship framework. So we're constantly working with the government around wildlife issues, doing joint training, doing joint patrols with our conservation officers, doing joint mining inspections within our traditional territory. And we also meet bi-weekly with the team from, the land guardian reps, our land resource officers, and members of different ministries within the government. So it's been really helpful in, working together on different projects within our traditional territory. So the relationship building is very important.
I know that you mentioned, the lack of roadways, and that this is, truly kind of beautiful, pristine land that infrastructure has not totally decimated. And part of the protection efforts is to make sure that doesn't happen. Is there an audience member is asking if there's any infrastructure or buildings or development that is threatening this area that you know of, and if you can share about that.
And that's, I guess, always the what if, right? We know that there is a lot of mining in our region. Within the Cascade Traditional Territory alone, we have over 10 abandoned mines within our territory that taxpayers are paying money for, where they didn't succeed. And so we've seen that impact. We know what it feels like. Our communities have felt it for decades. And so we're constantly thinking about, okay, well, sometimes, like I mentioned before, it just doesn't make sense to be pursuing certain industries and areas where there is more value to protecting them. And so when we're talking about infrastructure, a big part of the goal that we have in protecting these lands is, doing incredible work, like Tanya was saying, around ARUs. We want to know this landscape more. Having partnerships around research and understanding the impacts of climate change and how that's impacting bird species is huge, but also is the development of our own conservation economy. So when we're talking about infrastructure, I think that is the side of it that we're really excited about. We want to see this area protected, but we're not trying to keep people out of it. We're not doing how things were done in the past. We want to bring people into these spaces. We want to celebrate them. We want to invite all of you to come to this area. So ecotourism and a lot of the ecosystem services that the Cascade Nation can provide is what we're hoping for. And that's a good kind of infrastructure, I guess you could say.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're going to share the documentary link as well, but that's also a really amazing part of the documentary is talking about that link. There's an interesting question where someone is asking about land guardianship as kind of a new concept, asking about how might an Indigenous person become a land guardian and step into that kind of position. So I'm curious if you can answer that question, maybe broadly beyond Casca, but like how might an Indigenous person take on that kind of role in their community?
Tanya would know that.
I've started working, I have a background in earth and environmental studies. So I have a little bit of training on that, which kind of helps to intertwine, the Western science and the traditional knowledge. But I think just having that interest in your culture, your language, your lands is a huge part of it. We're always looking to bring people in, and we want to expand our program within the IPCA. So, we're going out into these remote areas with our guardian programs and having our elders as teacher to talk about those traditional ways and trails that lie within our traditional territory. There's so much that we learn when we're out on the land with the elders, just about, different wildlife behaviors, movement, things throughout the different seasons, the traditional plants and medicines that are available to us, right outside our door. So I think just having that want and need to learn about your traditions, culture, and protection of your lands and waters is super important. I mean, I was in social work before I got into environmental, and now this is just, where I belong, where I feel the best, especially when I'm out in the land. It's just an amazing feeling, that connection.
Mm.
Awesome. I think we have time for one last question, and it's something that you mentioned when you saw the question come up in the Q&A about the smoke from Canada fires making its way to New York City. It's something that we all in New York City experienced and was a big part of our lives for a moment there. And it really showed the way that, lands across this hemisphere are connected. We're all really connected. The question that is being asked here is really about drought and fire. We had fires all this past fall in our New York City parks. So this is an issue that I feel like we're all kind of thinking about, but how you're thinking about drought or fire, if it's a danger in the landscape that you're working with, and if it is, how you're dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I think it's on top of mind every year. We in the North have climate anxiety. Every summer we're wondering, is this going to be a bad fire year? Are we going to have low water? Are we going to have high water? There's so many variables that have impacted our people for thousands of years, but we're really feeling those impacts more than ever. And if I could say, I would highly recommend, if you haven't read the book Fire Weather by John Valiant, I highly recommend reading it. It speaks to kind of what we're dealing with up in northern Canada in the boreal forest, and that threat that we know exists every single summer. I think some of the great work we're trying to do with IPCAs and safeguarding these lands is to making them more resilient so that those fires don't occur in the same way that they are currently. But that's a global effort, right? We can't do it alone. There has to be more and more lands protected so that we're not feeling those impacts of climate change. And it's just a very real thing that we feel, and seeing pictures of what people in New York were experiencing. You could even see, your hand in front of you. There was so much smoke. We experienced that too. And I mean, Tanya can express that impact. We had a fire come right through our community a few years ago, and just we have to be as resilient as the land when we're thinking about these things that impact us globally, but we also have to be acting as players in this global world that we live in on this one planet to make good decisions for the land and for the people. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response. I don't know if you can hear a beeping sound. Let me know if you can, because my fire alarm is going off.
Oh.
Because there's a burning pizza in the oven in my home
different
right
kind of fire.
So don't worry about that. I'm fine. But I did want to give some closing remarks because we are unfortunately almost out of time. So before we say our goodbyes as part of this lecture, if you both can tell our audience what's next for you and how we can support you going forward.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think there's some incredible work we're doing on the IPCA and the work we're trying to do with the land guardians. And so I see already 10 people have signed our statement of support. I get emails when people sign it. So big show us in law. Thank you for that. We really appreciate it. It actually does mean a lot in helping us pave the way with government and industry and the partners that we have to make this a realization for us to be able to say we have thousands of people supporting this work from across the globe means a lot. So thanks for that. And just visiting our website, learning more about our project, sharing it with others would be huge. I'll let Tanya maybe speak to how people can help advocate for land guardians, because that is, again, something that connects us both in Canada and in the US. There's land guardian programs across both of our countries working towards protecting the land. So.
Yeah, another good site to check out is the Land Needs Guardians website.ca. There's a support letter there too for guardian programs across Canada. We are also working on finalizing our guardian website. So all of the work that we do throughout our program, including the bird monitoring, will be on there. So we can share that link with you, Jesse, to share later on once that site goes live. But just want to thank everybody again for letting us hold this space with you and sharing our story. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you. And thanks for everyone who joined us tonight. This was our final lecture in the series, and I think this was a really amazing end to that narrative. And, you know, a hopeful and like strong next step in conservation. So I hope you all who have joined us today will join us for another New York City Bird Alliance event soon, and also show your support to these amazing people who are doing work within our hemisphere for the birds that we see too. So, and as a reminder, you know, we're running bird outings throughout New York City all year round. So if you're here in this audience and you'd like to join us in person somewhere, we would hope to see you soon. So you can see a full calendar of New York City Bird Alliance events on our website, which will be put in the chat. So yes, we'll be following up with, if you didn't get the link to the support letter, we'll follow that up. Everyone will be able to receive that who attended the lecture. And so everyone have a great night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.